anything that you might add that would be helpful for them to know for this context about you? Because I'm going to pray for you otherwise and our morning together.
I think the only other thing to know is that I'm less involved in the day-to-day of Hungry for Life and been able to move more and more into helping other nonprofit organizations and churches with organizational leadership, organizational development, leadership coaching. So probably 80% of my time now is spent with other organizations like this is probably the only other thing to comment on there. And yeah.
That's relevant. Thanks, buddy. We'll just when you get a chance to, Grant, we'll get you to put on Dave's mic. Is it on right now?
Not fully. I have to check it. But
are you good on the camera? Do you want to finish there first? It's good. Okay. Well, then let me pray for you. I won't touch you because you'll notice that you are separated as you are, and we have the bubbled couple together, and a bubbled couple here together. It touches my heart. It's beautiful. These waters were placed on your chair with those men's gloves on hand, so we didn't do coffee. We would like to feed you, but it's challenging to do that in this time, and we're hoping to be done by noon, right? It'll depend. We don't want to truncate conversation, but we also can't let it go forever because it's the kind of conversation that can go for quite a while, I suspect. So let me pray for Dave and us and our morning together. Again, thanks for being here. This is fantastic. Good morning, Father. Good morning, Father God. Thanks for this day. As we talk about often, Papa, I woke up today because you let me. This day is pure gift. And with you, I'm wondering what we'll do with it. And the answer for the morning is this. And so, thank you for Dave and his life and his heart for the leadership and the organizational health of churches and parachurches who just want to continue to get healthier and healthier. Thank you for 20 years of him already doing that so that he can come here and help us figure that out for ourselves. I pray that our conversation this morning would be honest and enriching, and that we would, by the end of the morning, be excited about what we've talked about, but also where you're taking us. So we welcome you. We ask your Spirit to ignite our memories, ignite our storytelling, ignite our listening ability so that we can use this time to its best this morning. In the powerful and precious name of Jesus Christ, I pray. And we all said, Amen indeed. David, it is yours.
Thank you. I'd be curious to know, in addition to how Rob set up today, what are your expectations for today? How would you know if today was a valuable use of your time? I'm going to bring this screen up to ask you those questions. All right. This little small screen for a group spread out this far, so I'll read them or if you need that. But what are your expectations for today? What did you come expecting? How would you know if this was a good use of your time?
well, I'm expecting to get on with it.
Okay.
It's about a year ago that some of our church leaders asked prayer requests to help them discern the future direction of the church.
Okay.
And this is the first time that I'm aware of the congregation has been asked what their expectations are. So it took a year.
Took a year. Yeah. So let's get on with it. That's great to hear. Not that it took a year. It's great to hear you're ready to get on with it.
Well, we did have this little thing in there.
Sorry?
We did have this little thing in there.
Yeah.
COVID.
Oh, that little thing. Yeah. Mic check. There we go. Anything else? When you thought of signing up for today, what came to your mind that made you decide this was going to be worth your time? Great. Yep. Yep. See God at work among us. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Where are you going? Pretty pivotal time in the life of the church to have a transitional pastor, and this is always a time for reflection and a time for thinking about what God's called you from and to. So, yeah, that's a bit of a crossroads. Anything else? Anything else not said? Okay, we'll hold these up at the end and come back to them just to check in to make sure that we ended up where we said we would and your expectations for today were met. You can't see, the color's a little off, and because the screen's a little small, what you can't see is the very bottom one, which is what we're focused on today. But this is sort of a typical model for any nonprofit, any church, building blocks of any nonprofit organization, the behind-the-scenes stuff that people don't see day to day. They see your programs, they see what you're doing. Oftentimes, they don't see what's going on behind the scenes. And the very bottom one says vision, mission, values. And vision, mission, values, we'll talk about the definition of those terms because they're used often, but I don't think they're often understood well. But we're going to talk about what those are because vision, mission, values are says on the bottom right there, organizational positioning statements that become the filter for all that you do, all your decision making. If you're thinking about what you're going to be focused on or whether we should adopt this or go there or spend money on this, vision, mission, values should be the filter for decision making in the organization. The next one is board governance and function. Once you've got some positioning statements, what's our leadership structure? What's our governance structure? Who's making decisions on behalf of who and what decisions are whose to make, which is not what we're going to cover today. But as you go up the pyramid, results and planning, you can't do results and ministry planning unless you know what your positioning statements are, where you're headed, what's important to you. And then the ones on the top are typically, how is this going to be funded? And the very top one refers to what's the actual frontline services, activities that we provide for the people that we're here to help. And so I show you this just to put this conversation into context for an organizational consultation on something like vision, mission, and values, and where board governance will fit when we look at that in the new year. So if you have your device, I'd like you to go to www.menti.com. If you don't have your device, then we'll just have you speak out the answer to the question that's going to come up here in a second. But go to menti.com, and it'll ask you for a code. Stick in that code. It'll come up here in a second, too. Oh. I apologize, that screen went away. Oh, there it is. So if you go to menti.com and put in the code 41, 96, 79, and 5, and you can answer the question, what's one thing that you need in order to feel safe in this group to share and ask questions? I think it'll give you multiple choices for an answer if there's things that, more than one that's important to you. We call this safe container. What's the safe container is an exercise that gets us thinking on what do we need as a whole group? What are some of the ground rules for engagement so that people feel safe to give their input? If this is a congregational input thing, we can't assume that everybody feels safe talking about what is important to them or giving their feedback or asking questions. So what's one thing or a couple of things that you need in order to feel safe in this group to share and ask questions? Set aside biases. So that's an open mind. not coming with a specific outcome in mind as far as agenda. Engagement's really important because if there's only one or two people sharing, that makes it feel unsafe for other people to participate. So as many as possible participating and being courageous with your statements will encourage others to do the same. Open-mindedness, grace for each other, listening and understanding from other participants. That everyone would have a chance to say something. Yeah, you've taken some time out of a Saturday morning during COVID and risked your lives to come and have a conversation. So yeah, everybody have a chance to say something is important. Everybody has understanding that everyone has best interests. And the fact that you're here, and as Rob set up the context, my understanding or my assumption is everybody's best interests are what's in the best interest of the whole church, moving the entire congregation forward. Not what's in the best interest of maybe a particular subgroup of the church or what's in my best interest, but what's in our corporate best interest is what I assume that means. All input has value? Absolutely. Absolutely. Listening well, not interrupting. Acknowledgement of your input. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're going to get out of your head some of the things that are going on inside of your head for your church. And that can feel vulnerable to share those things if you haven't heard other people talk about the same kinds of things. So this is fantastic. Can we commit to these things? Yeah? Put up your hand if you're ready to commit to those things. Fantastic. Safe container. All right, now this is right away where we want to start hearing from you. I'll read these out loud if you can't see them for how far back you are. But this is where we need your input. And so here are the questions. What are some specific stories of when you felt most proud to be a part of Cedar Valley? They're also referred to as legacy stories. What are stories that maybe you've just heard about happened 40 years ago that make you feel proud to be a part of this church? And in each story, what Rob's going to do as we're telling these stories, he's going to look for two things. He's going to look for what was the specific contribution your church made in the lives of others in the stories that you tell. In other words, what was your church doing to have the impact that made you feel proud to be a part of the church? And then he's going to also look at what has been the result of the contribution of your church in the lives of others that are in these stories. So he's going to look for contribution and he's going to look for impact. So what are some stories from your experience or others that make you think, this is why I'm at that church, or because that happened to this person, or because that's what happened to me, this is why I'm at this church? Can I give you an example? In our organization, one of the first things that happened is when we started about 17, 18 years ago, we had a lady who was a friend of ours, and she's from the Ukraine, and she married a Canadian who was a friend of ours, a kid that was in my youth group. I was a youth pastor before going into parachurch ministry, and I had this guy in my youth group named Chad, and Chad went to Capernwray in Sweden, met a girl from the Ukraine. They got married, and he lived in the Ukraine for a while. And then they came over, and they settled in Chilliwack. And Mary, at the beginning of her time in Canada, she was cleaning homes for a job. And she would cleaning the homes of some good friends of theirs. And she's so passionate about the needs of people around the world. She'd walk into people's closets to clean them in houses and think, why do you need 8 pairs of boots? Like, I come here every week and those clothes haven't been used. Why do you need all those clothes? And she wasn't being pushy or mean. She was just being honest and asking the questions because she was just overwhelmed with our excess here. And she started to challenge people to, why don't you give some clothes away to people in the Ukraine? We can ship them there and get them there. And so there was a lady who said, I've got a pair of boots in the basement I don't use, so can I give you the boots? She said, that's great, because people in the Ukraine need the boots. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, there was a single mother who had 2 children, and the children were about 10 and 8 years old at the time. And the single mom had cancer, and she was dying, and they were living with this single mom's sister, their aunt. And the aunt was going to become the caregiver to these children. And as a result of them being so extremely poor and not having a father provide for them, winter was coming, and this little girl was asking God for the jacket and boots that she needed to go through the winter. And you probably know where this story is going. And her name is Victoria, and Victoria would tell her aunt, I'm praying for a pair of boots. And the aunt said, God doesn't exist, because if God did exist, your mother wouldn't be sick and we wouldn't be in this situation. And she said, no, I believe that God will provide a pair of boots. And she was continually challenged by her aunt. And sure enough, our partner in the Ukraine, the pastor that leads the church, received these shipments of boots. And as they got the boxes and opened them, there was this perfect pair of boots that fit her perfectly. And the pastor ran them over to the house and said, here's a pair of boots. And the aunt was just absolutely flabbergasted. She got the boots just before her mother died. And for her mother, it was, God's going to look after my kids. And the aunt came to faith and raised these 2 kids. And Victoria married a great guy, and they now live in Kazakhstan, where they do street ministry for street children who don't have parents looking after them. And that's one of our legacy stories. That's one of the many stories that we have that make me go back and be so happy that I was a part of some small part of this. And in that situation, our organization played a catalyzing role in the life of a lady who had an extra pair of boots, and the impact was, as I described to you. That's an example of a legacy story. So what are your stories like that for Cedar Valley? Yeah.
I'll tell you how we came to be introduced to Cedar Valley, how we got to know it. About 30 years ago, Cedar Valley would put on a special Christmas program called Visit to Bethlehem.
Okay.
The basement was fitted out as market stalls, bakers and scribes and teachers, and all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
They had sheep in the parking lot and things like that. We came and we were so impressed with the number of people that were coming to see this feature that it looked like they were a really lively, proud, effective ministry in doing that. They only did it for about 3 years because it was exhausting to me.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the 3 years, I realized that my son at the time had been coming to that event for half his life.
Wow.
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. So it's all so from his perspective, it was part of the tradition.
Yeah.
And we got exhausted, and the church got exhausted and hasn't done it since.
Sure. So what is it about that experience that made you proud to be a part of this church?
That it had an effective way of communicating with the general public.
Okay, so it was
They wanted to come to it.
okay. So it cared enough about the general public and put out an effective offering for people to come. And your son was impacted by it. So that obviously made it important for you. So what were some of the things in that story, for example, looking at contribution and impact, what were some of the things that the church was just doing to make that event happen? What was the church's contribution in that situation? Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay? So everybody pitched in, everybody worked hard, total group effort. Okay, so what you're also doing there, the contribution was to specifically focus outside of the building. Yeah. Yeah, that is a big deal. It does. So everybody involved in an offering that specifically was focused for people outside the building. What was the impact of it?
We started coming here.
Okay. All right. So it drew people to start attending the church. What's another example of the external impact that had? The impact on the people outside the church. What did you hear from people outside the church as a result of that event? Okay. Okay. So, all right, connected with people. Relationships were built. Yeah? What kind of an impact did it have on the people who were here, the people who were putting it on? How did you feel being a part of it? Okay. Made you proud of your church. Sorry? Belong to, okay, yeah. Togetherness, belong together. Yeah. Focused on something outside the church. Pride.
Sounded like it unified you quite a bit.
Yeah. Definitely heard that.
Involved and engaged with something together.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Okay. More burnout. Yeah. Cool. Mm. Mm. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. Great example of.
There was a season that us as youth would get together and go downtown Vancouver to Union Gospel Mission.
Okay.
And that was really impactful
Okay.
on my own life. We would go and we would present a program or whatever, even though we understood that they were coming in to listen so they could get
Sure.
a meal. We knew that, but you know, after that, I mean, that ended at one point. But then we, as a church, became involved in local missions.
Really?
Many people in this church that have served at downtown.
Wow.
At different places. Yeah, Hope Central and whatever. So it's just that has been very impactful on the people here and on others that are being blessed by this church.
Okay, so that's a great story, and that focus on the mission here in Mission came from started volunteering at
That's
UGM.
where it started.
Yeah.
Union Gospel wasn't in mission at the time.
Right.
So that was sort of the place that we went. And I mean, if I want to add to it, then we're also always been involved with the food bank. We were like Abbotsford. I remember going and packing boxes, and it was the food bank, right? That was called at the time. Anyways, yeah, just outside involvement.
Out. Cool. Again, similar to the first story, focused on people outside the church.
Yes.
So that was the and serving. What was your contribution? Spending your time, giving your time, practical needs of people. And what was the result of that contribution in the lives of the people that were outside the church?
Probably changed us more.
Okay, that's cool. So that's impacted the people internal, but that's fantastic. Yeah, it always changes us more, I think. Yeah.
Over the years, Cedar Valley has sponsored different refugee families
Okay.
and given them a home here. Sometimes exclusively, we were completely responsible for their care, and others times a consortium of other churches or organizations. Took a lot of effort with the team to assess the needs and how can we practically meet it. And that's happened a number of families in different areas of the world. I started years ago, and some of those people then have become a part of Cedar Valley, and others have
Wow.
moved on. And so I think that's been a very good thing that Cedar Valley has done.
Yeah. That
And
make
that's a huge collective effort.
another example of a huge collective effort. So again, focused on people outside of the church. It's what I hear in that story. It made you feel proud that this is your church. So the refugee ministry took a lot of time and effort. Impact was that it changed the lives of the people that came here and yours as well. Interesting. Sponsorship of missionaries? Okay, that's fantastic. What makes sponsoring missionaries, what makes you,
Feels like you're working in the world.
okay,
You're not just stuck at home. You can reach the world.
so the impact,
With the missionaries.
yeah, contribution. And so what did you do?
Different organizations as well, like MCC to
Yep.
MBS and all the rest of it. It was great.
And what was your church's contribution in those stories?
Well, prayer, financial,
Yep.
I don't know.
Yep.
They were probably better ones to tell you that information, but Margaret has lots of stories.
I would say, and just with her and so forth, but being part of the church, and specifically a care group. I'm a single, no husband,
Okay.
that when it came to making very important decisions in my life, like leaving Africa and doing something totally different in addiction,
Okay.
I went to my care group.
Wow.
I talked to the elders, or at least one, for them to then talk to the elders. I wanted their input
Yeah.
as somebody in leadership, and so I have looked to this church for that.
Wow. That sounds like it's a pretty meaningful thing for you. Yeah.
I have two stories,
Great.
but I didn't know if you were finished with.
Nope. Go ahead. Sounds like it's related.
First story happened before I came here, but I was told it. So this was back in the late 60s.
Do you want to turn around, Margaret, and address people and stand
Yes.
up maybe, if that's easier for you? Because we all love your stories.
So this is the late 60s, and for those of you that are newer to the church, of course the people that started spoke no German, and you would hear them talking amongst each other in that, and of course that's all changed now. But I was told that when they started the church here, they made a decision amongst themselves that if we're going to reach the community, we're going to have to speak English.
Hmm.
And to me, that just spoke volumes of reaching the community.
Hmm.
Getting away from their comfort and being with Bible translators, you know that mother tongue is so important.
Mm-hmm.
They said no. To reach the community, we will speak English.
Wow.
So this is where we are. And then I have another story.
Go ahead. They're great.
What impressed me in those early years were the grandmas of the church, the grandmas and the head were still here. And I would see them with their white hair pulled back in the front, sit there and be very quiet. And this is the 60s, and we had hippies with their orange jeans and praise the Lord. And it was great. And I've said this to many of my friends of how it was so neat to see the two, in a sense, opposites worshiping treated as they were, what they were happy with, and worshiping the Lord in quietness and peace. They did their thing. And I thought that was a neat testimony to the community of being open.
Wow. Two great stories. Common denominators in those stories is what I heard is being willing to give up your comforts, your preferences for the sake of others outside the church. That's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Similar to what Margaret said, I was involved in the youth ministry here.
Okay.
And one of the activities that we did annually was to have the kids work with the blanket making committee here.
Mm.
The blankets were made and they were given to MCC
Mm.
to be donated to other places around the world.
Yeah.
And so for me, what I would get out of that is the educational value.
Mm.
Like the kids got to work with an older generation. We got to know the church. They got to learn a practical skill that was also that also provided an essential service
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
people globally. So you've got intergenerational activity there. We learn about the Mennonite history of how it all started with the blanket making. There was
Mhm.
service and missions globally. So it was quite educational for us.
Wow, cool. Saw contribution and impact in that story. Yeah.
Don't want to be the only one talking too much, but
No, it's okay.
until this year, my area of service was ushering at funerals.
Okay.
And we opened our church to the community for funerals. And sometimes we'd have 20 a year.
Wow.
And so you get a lot of non-church people.
Mhm.
And my job as an usher was to show them where the washrooms were, where the exits were, and things like that. So, but we made our church inexpensive
Mhm.
for people, and we'd get 200 and 300 people sometimes.
Wow.
So it made made us seem community friendly.
Yeah. Wow.
Sorry, Glenn, I missed the, I got ushering and I didn't get the second word, so that was pretty key, I
Ushering
think.
ushering at funerals.
Funerals, thanks, that's the word.
And sometimes our pastor would be the only clergyman that these people had ever interacted with.
Wow. Most of your stories so far relate to people who, the focus of your efforts were people that aren't currently in the building every week. You notice that? Most of your legacy stories relate to a priority for people who aren't here yet. That sounds pretty great and healthy. Yeah.
The last couple of years on Halloween,
Mhm.
our church has set up tables, at least one table, and this year I know they're doing two at entrances to the park where kids cut through. And they have hot chocolate for them. And so we're reaching out into the community.
Very cool.
It's happening again next Saturday night, sign up!
The only improvement on that is if you're going to give them hot chocolate, we should make the washrooms available half an hour later.
So we'll put you in charge of the porta potty delivery, thanks Ben, appreciate that, brilliant.
Any other story?
I would add to what I'm learning in terms of how your missionaries came to be is they were incubated here.
Hmm.
You prayed for them, with them, care grouped them, financially supported them. You've sent people to those partnered fields. But you heard the story last week. It was incubated here with Seeds of Hope, right? That's important. You've been able to imagine things and watch God sort of stir it and get on it. That's a big deal.
For all those stories, what was the spiritual condition of what was going on inside of the church at the time that resulted in that external impact? So that was the foundation. Spiritual growth was happening inside that resulted in that. What else? Care groups came up again.
Cheryl, I didn't quite get that. I got spiritual growth was happening. Did you say how it was happening, or what were the signs?
Maybe Bible study groups, care groups,
Thanks, buddy.
there was lots of opportunities. Opportunities to share with one another
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in our lives and how God is working in that, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, community. Similar to Margaret's story about care group being a place where you could come and get input and direction and any other time that you can remember before we move on that makes you say, "Oh yeah, that's my church, and I'm so glad I attend there."
When we were sending groups down to Guatemala
Okay.
on a regular basis,
Yeah.
or at least a group in the summer with kids and adults.
Yeah. Very cool.
Last fall and the fall before, we did a big block party,
Okay.
which the whole point was to get people who aren't here here. And we had an outdoor service, rain or shine, and we did like we brought in like rides, and we brought in like kind of all sorts of carnival type things, and just gave us space for people to come and have fun and experience what church could be without actually like pulling them into the building. We like did it all outside, so it was sort of in like their space.
Right.
And those days were like, I felt super pumped to be here
Yeah.
and really stoked that we were doing something totally not for us. Like,
Yeah.
it just felt so
Yeah.
fun to see like so many people that weren't here and to like interact with people who maybe had never come and yeah, and do it on a very like safe space of just like, we're here to have fun and we're here to just
Yeah.
do something for you.
Okay. Two more.
Vacation Bible School.
Okay.
And again, it's sort of like what Pam has said about decorating. Like you could transform spaces here so like students or like little kids come in.
Yeah.
You can see the look on their faces.
Cool.
And, like the joy on their faces.
Yeah.
And like I absolutely love it. Like, kids worship God with such abandon,
Yeah.
right? And that's
Yeah.
so inspiring.
Yeah.
Both as an organizer and as a listener, Pastor Doug like worked really hard on that and like decorating, but the stories that they tell, the kids that leave
Yep.
with those stories, it's so inspiring.
Wow. One more.
And even just like I don't think we have them here anymore, but we had a group of older Sinian men that would come, and they were hanging out in the park for years, and we ended up providing some space for them to come and have coffee and just.
Oh wow.
For them, that was a very meaningful gesture, and so when we had the fall fair and had events like that, they would come to it. And I think
Really?
last fall fair, they brought it was like 200 or 300 samosas, and
Really?
yeah, like just they came amongst us when we were downstairs. It was raining outside, and they sat together, and
That's amazing.
yeah, it was pretty awesome opportunity to
Yeah.
reach a demographic of like how does a white-centered Christian church
Mm-hmm.
reach that demographic of mission?
Yeah.
Somehow we did it.
You did it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those East Indian grandpas, they passed the hat among themselves and came up with $1,200 for the shoebox ministry.
Oh, you're kidding.
They came and helped pack boxes into the truck too.
You're kidding me. Wow.
Yeah, just because we were like, you can play cards here.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's kind of it.
I love that I know the story because you told me this, that they gave Dan a coat, right? At the end when he left, did they not give him something like that? It was very,
Really nice.
really symbolic though.
Yeah.
Dan was their pastor for 20 years. He
Hmm.
left February.
So that says that they felt a connection and a community with him, and that he was theirs to a degree. Wow. Wow. What a great place to start when it comes to thinking about your future, is starting in the past and the things that make you the most proud to be part of this church. Just the energy and what you're sharing is pretty fantastic. And it's through that lens that we now want to move on to talk about the future. Is that okay? I feel like we could end there and it would still be a productive use of the morning.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. But we've got to get on with it.
Okay. Oh, yeah. We're going to hear about it from Glenn.
Yeah.
Interview Matt.
So every nonprofit, it doesn't matter whether it's a church or spiritual or not spiritual, every nonprofit organization that you can think of exists to address some kind of a problem. That's the only reason we start nonprofits, because there's not a whole lot of reason for them to exist if our purpose was generating money. So every nonprofit exists because of a problem. SPCA, the Wildlife Fund, all of them, we can identify a problem. And it's really important as you're thinking about your future to have clear what is the problem that Cedar Valley exists to fix. What's the problem that you were founded to address when your church started all those years ago? What's the problem that you want to fix in the world that makes your existence worth it? Okay, people are broken and need Jesus. Which people? Okay, all people. You didn't have to think about that very long. You seem pretty clear about that. It's pretty awesome. Been around a long time. People are broken and need Jesus. How else would you describe the problem? Pretty all-encompassing, your answer, but what's another way that you would describe the reason that your church exists? Not in terms of some sort of a polished statement, but what for the people who started the church, what kept them up at night that made them say, we've got to do something about this? What was the this? Meeting people's needs. What kinds of needs? Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Would you say amongst, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that amongst chief needs was relationship with each other, Christian community. And that was sort of a really core value at the start here. Is that fair to say? 80 years ago. Okay.
Educating their children as well,
Yeah.
I beg your pardon?
educating their children in Christian ways.
Right.
And out of a context of persecution and what they'd been through the Second World War and movement to South America and other places. Read your history on your website, and that's a pretty fantastic way of describing it. Right? Preserving culture? Yeah. Yeah.
But the miracle of that is they started a German-speaking church in the middle of the war.
Yeah. Yeah, let's go all over the community and speak German at the time. Yeah. But that shows the priority of people that came here needed to have start off with community in a place where they could identify and preserve culture and keep relationship and remember where they came from. So how would you describe that as a problem? What was the problem in your founding story that you were founded to address?
I think on some level it was a place to belong.
Okay, that's great. So people needed a place to belong. So the problem was they didn't have a place to belong. Any other descriptions of the problem? Or does that catch it all? care for each other's practical needs. Yeah, I saw that in the story as well. To address the needs of people, which is super interesting given all your stories, your legacy stories related to meeting people's practical needs. Obviously a heart for that in your founding story.
I think there was also an element of tradition. That's what you did when you went to a new place. You started a church,
Yeah. Yeah.
started a school.
Yeah. And what does the church or the school represent for people that go to a new place?
It represents they have now a place.
Yeah. A place to go, a place to belong, people to belong to. A place. A place to belong. Okay.
Are you looking for origin story in this question, or are you looking for current, why do we exist?
More of your origin story.
Okay.
The problem that was the context at the time that generated your existence. Not sort of a conceptual reason for existing now.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Is there any other way that you would, however, great lead in, is there another way that you would describe what the problem is now that you would address to exist? Is there any changes in the problem that justifies the church's existence?
I think maybe change it. I'm trying to think of how to word it so it justifies the church's existence, but a thing to consider is that the world is now more antagonistic towards the gospel rather than ignorant.
Okay. That's a great way of describing a problem that the church could focus on, is that the world is now antagonistic to the church. In a way that it wasn't 80 years ago. Any other descriptions of the current problem that
Only the current problem, but I think that we're coming up to rising to the challenge quite well.
which challenge?
To reach out
Okay.
to our community.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, didn't get it. Rising to the challenge of what?
Reaching out to the community.
Okay, thanks. It's the mask.
I know.
Yeah.
You gotta make you listen carefully.
Another challenge we're facing now is competition.
Okay.
You can go shopping on Sunday mornings, you can go to any sporting events. They schedule your kids' soccer games on Sunday morning.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you summarize that as a problem? What's the problem with that?
The church is on the fringe.
Okay.
Jesus is on the fringe.
Church, Jesus on the fringe of society,
It's not an automatic priority for people.
isn't a priority for people. There's the whiteboard. Whiteboard's being filled up by Pastor Rob. Next question. For-profit business has owners, correct? Right? So whether it's either private business, it exists for the benefit of the owner. If it's a publicly traded company, it exists for the benefit of the shareholders, the financial benefit. They're the beneficiaries, not just the stakeholders, but the beneficiaries. So in a nonprofit context, there are also owners. And in a way to think about your owners, they're your beneficiaries that the church exists to help. They're in a nonprofit situation, they're sometimes referred to as moral owners. So that when your board meets, your board represents the moral owners of the organization. They lead or give direction to the organization in trust. They're also sometimes called trustees. They hold the organization in trust for the people it exists to benefit. So, who are your moral owners? Other ways to look at the question: who are the beneficiaries your church was founded for? Who are you representing when you plan and execute your programs? And we'll come to the last question after we've got a bit of a list. What are the priority of those owners? Because depending on how you prioritize those owners will determine the kinds of programs and activities that you plan and execute, how you spend money, how you spend your time. So going back up to the top question, who are your owners? Who does the organization exist to benefit? Okay, the next generation. That's a great start. What else? Who else? Okay, people that don't know Christ in mission. Is that what you mean? Yeah. People of mission who don't know Jesus.
Missionaries.
Okay.
Sorry, Gene?
Missionaries.
Thank you.
Missionaries.
Got it, thanks.
Current members.
Current members. Yep, people who attend here. They're for sure beneficiaries or moral owners of the organization. Anybody else you can think of?
I think there are some areas of ministry outside of the congregation that I'm thinking sometimes our leaders have been involved in prison ministries
Okay.
and other groups like that.
Okay. So how would you describe that group of moral owners? What are the characteristics of that group?
Could you encompass that into just our community?
Yeah, yeah, you could, yeah. Rob, could you read those lists of moral owners? If we had a whiteboard, we'd have them up for you to see, so you just have to see it in your mind's eye right now. Because if I write on that, it will be fairly permanent.
So next generation, people who don't know Jesus, missionaries, current members, ministries outside the church like prison ministries, so as a whole, unchurched community.
So in that list, this is where you're going to need to be a little brave. How would you prioritize how would you prioritize that group? What are the priority of the list of owners?
As it currently stands, or as a...
Good question. Good question. Let's first of all answer the ideal, the aspirational priority of those owners. What would you like the priority of those owners to be? The father? Yeah. And
What?
Jesus.
Maybe it's me, actually. I didn't hear you say it. I didn't hear it there even. Who, what?
The father. Jesus. God's the owner. And I'm glad you brought that up. What's your name? Terry. Thanks for bringing that up, because usually when I get to this place in the consultation, I usually forget to say, I'm assuming God's your ultimate owner. So, but really good to bring up, because I forgot to say that. And that's a really good focus, is that ultimately his glory is the benefit. In terms of people,
From that list. I'll read it again. Next generation, people who don't know Jesus, missionaries, current members, ministries, parachurch, outside the church, and unchurched community as a whole.
I think if it was like my ideal, I'd love it if
Thanks for being brave.
who are we here for? What are we doing? How do we make that happen? That'd be I'd love that.
Very cool. Thanks for being brave and putting that out there.
Our missionary secondary, like as in very close to the top of that.
Yeah,
How we can
because you could
support
kind of
those.
like even put that sort of in the same thing.
Be-
They are reaching people that.
Okay.
Like yeah,
Okay.
On our behalf.
yeah.
So,
In physical places that we're not.
yeah. That's very cool.
Probably the next generation after that.
Next generation after that?
And assuming that we can put our current members and attendees on the bottom of the list, assuming that we're healthy.
Now, that's where I disagree, because I think that pastoral care for your members is extremely important.
I
don't
think
want-
it's important, that's why I said assuming that your members we're healthy as a congregation.
Oh, okay.
If we're healthy as a congregation, then we can now place ourselves as secondary importance.
But we may not be healthy as individuals in that organization.
So, yeah, I hear similarities between what you're saying.
Sometimes I feel like I'm one of the 99 sheep that the shepherd has abandoned to go look for the one.
Okay. Thanks for that. That's important to know as well. And again, when it's pretty ethereal or theoretical to sit here and say this would be our ideal, it's important for planning. But I really appreciate your question of what's an aspirational list of priorities versus a current list of priorities. We'll come back to that question because we'll answer that as well. But really important to bring out. That's why even current people that attend here, if there's not health within the church, you're not going to be able to do those things. So you've just described that as have you really effectively. Yeah, but yeah.
But that's part of like discipleship is part of next generational type
Right.
idea. Like when I think of next generation, I think of
Okay.
that as an aspect of it.
So people who are here that need to be discipled.
Yeah.
I think the church continues to struggle with finding the balance between its call to discipleship, fellowship, the belonging, and evangelism.
Okay.
And I think part of this is we're looking for that healthy thing for Cedar Valley to incorporate the building up of the church as well as the reaching out aspect, the evangelism side of the church in a practical and communicating way.
Okay. That tension. Yeah, that tension. Because in your historical stories, your focus was, I would say, 80% of the stories focused on people that weren't here, but you also said that the reason you're able to do that was because of the health of the relationships in the community that were here at the time. Love for one another, love for outreach. So heard both in those stories. That's cool. That lines up with your list of priorities. Coming back, what was your name? Justin. Coming back to Justin's intuitive question about what would be, that's your aspirational list. People that don't know Jesus, missionaries who are serving in your situation in other locations, next generation, people who are already here. Assuming, we're not right now, assuming you all agreed that was the priority, what would be the current list of priority of your beneficiaries based on what's real happening in the church over the last couple of years?
I think maybe a list of priorities is maybe the wrong mechanism to look at this through.
Okay.
Maybe more like a pie.
Ultimately, that's where we're headed. But the reason that I start off with prioritizing them is because, for example, let's say we were to go from this consultation to the board governance consultation. When the board sits down to meet, we ask the question there, who are you representing as a board? Oftentimes, church board members will think, I'm here to represent the congregation. If that's the case, if the board's primarily representing the congregation, you're going to make different decisions than if the board was representing the people who aren't here yet. So it's not just an academic or theoretical conversation, it's pretty practical. And so ultimately, it's not like you're saying we're going to prioritize these people over these people in a list of priorities, that the people who are attending here are just going to get the scraps and leftovers of people's time. That's not the end goal of it, but it does help you in terms of your future planning. Because if your priority, your list of priorities was people who are here are more important than the people who aren't here, you're going to spend your money differently. You're going to make different decisions. But if looking at it from an ultimately a pie chart perspective, which is always the most healthy way of saying it, is you might say we're going to allocate staff time more according to our priorities than maybe the way that it currently is. So yeah, great filter. And what would you say would be your current your more real priorities in terms of your moral owners or your beneficiaries? Recently.
Would it help you if I relisted them? So previously it was, and I think we're all saying the same thing actually. That
Yeah.
It's not an either or, it's an and both.
Yeah.
And we're trying to find the balance between outreach and enrich, inward, outward. So they were unchurched, 1, missionaries, 2, next gen, 3, current members, 4, assuming they are healthy. What is it now?
What has it been in your recent past? No wrong answer. What's your perspective on what that priority has been?
I think it would be different. Depending on who you ask, it would be very different.
Sure.
I think if you ask leadership, the priority would have been reaching, I think probably blended between reaching the community and helping with the health of the congregation.
Okay.
But if you asked other people, it would probably be more congregation centric.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm not sure if that answers that.
It's a great start. Other thoughts?
We would spend a higher we have practically spent a higher percentage of our time and money on those who are here.
Okay. In how long of a recent past would you guess? Not super.
It's been probably, yeah, it would be years, I think, that have become kind of transformed into, if you want to use the word priority,
Yep.
you know. There's aspects of so much of what we do that has an element of outreach, if you want to use that word, to it, but that wasn't the primary motivation for that.
Okay.
Like in, you know, in the one aspect of the children's program, primarily for those here, but we have families from the community come in that we celebrate and bring them in. But overall for the church, that's probably not the goal. It's to discipleship for the children.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been, and other aspects of the program bring people in, but I don't think that's the primary goal of why that ministry is happening.
Okay. It's been primarily for the people who are here.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think so.
Okay.
And I think for the last 8 months, we've just been trying to desperately hold on to what we've done.
Yeah. And we have a new paradigm now that changes your priority of beneficiaries and how you're reaching out to them. So that's a really good perspective right now too. But as we translate these conversations for your leadership team into the future, it's helpful to get that bigger picture perspective. Yeah, I would say that's a really accurate picture, that most churches are just trying to hold on to the people who are already in the building right now. That's the priority of ownership. Hopefully that's temporary.
I don't know, sensing that even though that's been the priority, the health of the individuals here isn't all that great.
Okay.
And I'm seeing that is coming out in, nobody wants to step up to lead care groups, to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Bible studies, yeah, like, that's hard.
Yeah.
Where are we,
Sure.
in our foundation?
That's interesting. So even though I'm hearing people say, yeah, we've moved away from the primary priority being people outside to those inside, that's been the last number of years, but the result of that has not been particularly.
Yeah, we have, yes, I don't feel that we as a congregation have grown stronger in our faith.
That's interesting, even though the priority seems to be, yeah.
So, I mean, someone can speak against that if they choose, but that's,
I'm really thankful for your evaluation and your courage to say that. Any other thoughts around that? Yeah? Okay. General consensus?
We had more excitement and joy prior to our gradual switch to being focused on our members here. I think when we were focused on,
Wow.
our outer
Yeah.
community, all our trips to Guatemala, and I mean, it took a village, and that's what we were. And I think there was more excitement and joy in everybody here,
When
working towards a common goal.
when your focus wasn't on you.
Not just me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's something to be said about like when you are doing things like that, there's a spiritual aspect that like fills you up and that energizes you in that. So even though you may be working harder or longer or something, like there's this really cool aspect of God being like, okay, that's okay, like keep doing it.
Yeah.
I'll fill you up.
I'll look after you. Yeah.
Exactly, so that you can keep doing that and keep spreading and keep like investing in people who aren't here.
Yeah.
But if you take that aspect away, and it's like a give and take, right? Because at some point, yes, you do have to make sure that your community here is healthy, and then once it is, that's when you can grow out of it and like be reaching the people that aren't here. But there's a tension with that because if it's too much inward, it can get tiring.
Okay.
Because you're not seeing necessarily, you may not be seeing as many fruits as you want to be encouraged.
Yeah, we could probably all quote scriptures that say, where God says, look after the needs of the world and I'll look after you.
Was there something that happened between what we used to do and who we is now? Was there something that turned the corner?
Grant?
It's not an asking that. The enemy loves to destroy healthy churches. So that's what's happened. That's what happens in all churches. The enemy loves getting in there whenever there's a sense of comfort or success. And so it's sneaky and slow.
So from a spiritual perspective, that,
But yeah, we do have somebody at the bar.
okay, yeah,
It's a spiritual war.
yeah. Struggle's not against flesh and blood.
I was just wondering, was there a decision made or did something happen that there was a switch, or was it truly just a gradual?
I think it's a my perspective would be a gradual sense of apathy, um, a gradual lack of ownership, a gradual lack of personal responsibility. I think those things just naturally happen over time if they're not intentionally addressed.
I think burnout is part of that too.
Yeah.
It can also happen when people that are energizing and exciting, maybe something happens in their life and they move cities or they change churches and you don't quite realize their impacts on you.
Mm.
And then when they're gone, it's that gradual like change of things, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, like who? Yeah, people are stepping down or not volunteering, and that can just have this slow effect on groups of people.
Okay. So just a gradual developed apathy.
or those that step up and are excited about something, get something going, and then they don't get the response or the help or the, just even encouragement in what
Yeah.
they're stepping into.
Yeah, so then there's fear in trying.
Yeah.
Because, well, I didn't really do it last time, or I ran myself and my team into the ground because we didn't have enough volunteers, or, yeah, things like that.
Super helpful. Yeah.
I think there's a perspective that's changed when people think
Yeah.
Because when you lose your sense of purpose, you don't feel spiritually fed. I
It's a
think that
great.
perspective is kind of disappearing, isn't it?
That's a great summary of what we've just talked about. Yeah. So no one thing that happened where all of a sudden you went, but just something that gradually started to not realizing that now you're there.
Well, I think was mentioned some time ago was when we did those big Christmas things, each person that was mentioned had their own little thing to do.
Yeah.
Became part of the whole. And sometimes now, if someone comes in and doesn't recognize the little pieces that others are doing, they will take on doing them all themselves.
Huh.
And then the people that had been doing the little parts say, oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Guys, would I be characterizing this rightly to say that in 2008, when we went into recession, that perhaps there was a switch here on the mentality of financing and a bit of fear coming out of that, maybe some managing and controlling? That's, I think, maybe continued a little bit. Is that fair to say? I've been told that by people here. Did you get a sense of that? Would that be?
That could be a component, yeah. I don't think our church is hinged on that, but it would be a component likely, yes.
Yeah.
Contributing factor.
Doug's been here 22 years.
Okay.
I would have a sense of those kind of things.
Well, one thing that sticks out in my mind is one time a few years ago we were having a financial crisis, and I dared to suggest that we could solve that by just getting more people in. And some of the church leaders really came down hard on that, saying, no way, we're not going to get people in just so we can get their money.
Okay.
So that sounded to me like they didn't want church growth.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I can see how you would think that. Yeah, that sounds very symptomatic of the problem that's been discussed. Yeah. Okay. We won't park on the why too much because I think that could become an unhealthy conversation. But it is really healthy to ask what happened and where did that go. But you are where you are, and you're at a pivotal place to look towards future leadership to go about changing that. So that's a helpful place for us to be heading. And a good time for us to take a break. Can we take a 10-minute, 15-minute break and come back? And let's try and come back as close to 10:30 as possible, and we'll move on to the next set of questions.
How are you guys doing? Are you cold? Are you warm? Are you temperature okay? Okay, forget it. I withdraw the question.
Margaret, what keeps you busy these days? Pardon? What keeps you busy these days? I've started my journal. People ask about the stories. So, you're writing a book. It is chilly in here though, isn't it?
It is a little chilly.
I call it a book, I just journal. It's
Keeps you awake a little bit.
on bigger socks or something. Bag of letters. Yeah, so I take a lot of stories, most of them from there. Worked on some photos that
Are we not waiting for the bathroom? Is that what's happening here?
would be the equivalent of the word purpose, which is all kinds of language around what do we actually do as an organization or as a church. When we come to work every day as a staff, when your board comes to, when your congregation gathers, what are the things that you're actually doing? It's a statement of activity, of what you just do when you show up to work every day. Your vision, however, is to what end are we doing it? Why are we doing it? And I'll illustrate it here in a second in a COVID-friendly way. But to what end are we doing it is your vision. Your values are, what are the non-negotiables what are the few non-negotiables that define your behavior on how you're going to move towards your vision? So a pretty limited list of non-negotiables that make you as a church, that say if we stop doing it this way, we would stop being the unique organization that we are. And strategy, which is not for today, but where this would lead to in another consultation, is once you've got your vision, mission, and values, strategy is all about answering the question, what are our next most important few steps to move towards that vision? Of all of the things that we could be doing, and there are so many, what are the next most important 3 or 4 things that should be what we're all pulling in the same direction towards in order to move us a step closer to our vision? That's how we're using the terms. Help in terms of defining the terms? We'll get at more of them in a second. But the way to look at this is if we were not in a COVID time right now, I would have you work on this activity where I would give you a group of 4 or 5, a bag of nuts and bolts, all of this stuff in a little Ziploc bag. And then what I would have you do is I would show you a picture of what it looks like all put together properly. And then we would have you work together on the pieces as a team to rebuild the picture of what it is that you're heading towards or working towards. And so I'd give you this little bag of nuts and bolts. I would show you this picture that's on the screen here. And then I would turn it off and say, okay, rebuild that with these pieces. What would be the problem for you if I just did for you what I just showed you? If I said, here's the pieces, there's the picture, now build it. Go. Yeah, memory. What about memory would make that tough?
It's just short-term memory recall. You have all the pieces, you probably can do most of it, but there's going to be some details you overlook.
Yep, exactly. What else would be a problem? What would be a problem for you in recreating that picture? Not being clear, not being clear on what the final picture looks like for very long. Yeah, exactly. If you're not focused on if you're not clear together on who's working on what, you're going to have some conflict over what pieces go where. What else would be a problem? How would that show up? Yeah, how are we leading ourselves or governing ourselves in order to best contribute towards that picture?
Or more likely, nobody wants to be the
Or nobody. Exactly. There would be all kinds of problems. And so when we do this actually live, I show you this picture and then I say, okay, go ahead, recreate it, and they dump the bag out, and it's usually a 5-minute process, and it ends up being a hot mess compared to that picture. And then what we do is we take it all apart again, put it in the bag, and I say, okay, now organize yourselves in a better way to do this, and I'll leave the picture up there longer. And then the teams go, okay, I'll take these pieces, you take these pieces, you take these ones. Which way is the top? Which is the bottom? Okay, and then I'll leave it up longer, and then give you a better picture of it or a better gaze on it, and then I'll turn it off, and everybody works on their pieces, and it gets a little better next time. And the goal is to recreate this in the shortest amount of time possible with the fewest mistakes in the activity. And we have all kinds of lessons in here about teamwork and governance and vision and mission and conflict. It's a pretty fantastic teaching tool that would break all sorts of public health rules right now. But I think you get the idea. And so as it relates to vision, this picture here is the equivalent to the vision of to what end are we working together. And this picture here represents the mission. What are we actually doing when we come together in order to recreate that picture? Who's working on what part of it? We do leadership training all in different countries, and we take these bags all over the place and get people to work on it, and it's a fantastic tactile tool to get them to work on it. So the vision, to what end are we doing it? Future picture of addressing the problem. Another way to look at it is, remember what you had talked about your problem is? What were some of the statements about the problem?
People are broken and need Jesus, meeting needs, immigrants, refugees, relational, practical, educating their children, retain culture.
Great.
German-speaking church in the middle of World War II, start off with community, remembering where they came from, very poor, shared food, clothing.
Great.
A place to belong.
So that is the equivalent for your church for this is the problem. All the pieces are apart, and it's a mess. This is the vision. To what end are we going to come together to work on it? This is what are we actually doing when we come together to work on it? And the values and strategy is how are we going to exist together? What are the few non-negotiables that guide how we're going to go about the activity in order to recreate the final picture? Questions or comments or thoughts in terms of how we're defining? So let's start with mission. Statement of purpose. So to state that an organization has a mission is to state its purpose, not its direction or where it's headed yet. For example, the mission of a farmer, using it as an illustration, hasn't changed in thousands of years. It's to grow food, bring it to market at a price that pays for all the costs, provides an accepted standard of living. That's the same mission for every farmer. Properties of missions, they usually start with two words or verbs or action words because they're very present tense and activity focused. Answers the questions of what we do in the regular course of a week or a day in our organization. What are the service activities of the organization? So, what is the mission of this organization? How would you answer these questions for Cedar Valley? Pastor Rob will write them down. Not looking for wordsmithing. We're just looking for concepts. And in this case, the concepts related to what you do.
For this one, sometimes I get a little bit mixed with the way the definitions for mission or vision go value, but would it be wrong or just too generic to say for churches it should be the Great Commission, to go into all the world, make disciples, teach them to serve the law?
That's a fantastic biblical articulation of a mission for a church. So say that again.
To go into all the world, making disciples, teaching them to serve the law.
Yeah, so that's a great commission. Many churches will revert right away to the Great Commission as a statement of purpose for a church because it's pretty clear there. To, look at that, starts with to or other action words. Jesus followed this organizational planning. No, he didn't. What do we do every day? Make disciples. To make disciples, very verbish and activity-oriented service activities of the organization. So in your going about of making disciples, what are some of your activities that the church does in that process? What should you be doing? This is aspirational now. We're talking about the future. Sorry? Living by example. That's great. Remember, we're not looking for walking out of here with a statement that's going to go on a wall. We're just going to provide the content for your leadership team to do that later. Wordsmithing in a group of 20 is generally not productive.
For the last few years, I've been confused on whether we
Okay. Okay. Um, we'll park that one for a bit. That might relate to vision, what you're wanting to be. But really good statement about the current condition that affects where you are stuck or focused internally. What are the things that you do to make disciples?
This might be really generic, but like providing ways for each like demographic to grow
Okay.
in their
Sure.
discipleship. So like something that like to make disciples in children versus adults is going to look very different. So
Sure.
providing differences for different people. That sounds really dumb, but like
Yep.
It sounds like that's what you're just trying to say, putting up a challenge.
yeah, and like different ways of challenging different groups of people.
Okay.
Could we encompass that just by teaching?
Teaching, different ways of teaching, different.
Yeah.
Different methods of
More
teaching.
detailed than just teaching.
Yeah.
Because it has to be like demographically based.
Okay. So subgroup specific.
Yeah.
Again, purpose isn't to wordsmith. It's just to grab the concept. But demographic specific
Teaching opportunities.
teaching.
Learning
Sure.
opportunities.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
I think another purpose is to have a safe and welcoming facility.
Okay. Safe and welcoming place. Facility, building. Yeah. These are all the activities involved in the Great Commission. Trusting? Trusting relationships? With who? Okay. We're just putting it all in the container, so let's just fill it up with whatever you think are discipleship making activities that would describe your purpose. Okay, small groups. That's something that you do, yeah. Okay. That's great.
Congregationally, we're meeting in small groups, but we have a common purpose. We're all either teaching is unified, or missionally we're achieving similar goals, or setting similar goals, that kind of thing. They're just not isolated groups, they're united in some way.
Meeting practical needs. Some examples?
Presley. Yep. So financial assistance.
That's great. Yep. Meeting practical needs. Sure sounds consistent with your history too, doesn't it? That's cool. What else do you do? What do you do on a Sunday? To make disciples. Yeah, so what's that? Oh, yeah. Right now you stay.
Weekend. In person. 3 services. Sign up. There we go.
Sorry?
Church next Sunday is on standard.
Stands.
That's true too.
Oh, right.
Don't worry, you'll be here an hour early.
Yes. Or sleep in. Do yourself a favor. Come on time and sleep in. To worship, is that a purpose?
It's an action word, absolutely. Does it make disciples? Yep. Hopefully. Yeah, worship. What else? Follow Christ. Yep. What? Reaching community. Yep. Fellowship with each other.
There's some sort of teaching that we're all hearing.
Teaching.
That varies in a lot of different ways.
Yep. okay. Generosity of your time and money. Giving. Prayer. It's an idea. Yeah, we do all those things. All of those things are involved in disciple making. In this process of a church coming up with a mission statement, it's pretty hard to compete with the Great Commission in terms of being creative at coming up with a mission statement. So I am seeing some churches that will try and describe the Great Commission in a different way, or just say that the Great Commission is their mission and purpose, because it is, and tie all of that into all of those activities that you've just mentioned into the disciple-making activities. And again, not for today, but it does, what you're wanting to avoid is some long convoluted statement that no one's going to remember that tries to encompass as much of this as possible, because that won't help you. And so, is there anything that wasn't kind of brought up in terms of activities that the church is involved with regularly that you want to go into the container of mission or purpose? Encourage.
You want like tangible examples as well? Or
Sure, if that helps flesh out the concept, absolutely.
no, I'm just thinking a lot of the stuff we're saying is very theoretical,
Yep.
very like high level, generic concepts versus tangibles.
So what would some tangibles be?
Working alongside Seeds of Hope or Family Hoopy, or with Margaret Dobson, or like all the other very specific ministries or missionaries that we've worked with in the past or currently.
Yep.
I'm just trying to think of a bunch of our seniors work down at the cottage.
Fantastic. So service opportunities. Yes, practical service opportunities coming alongside of ministries. Those are all disciple-making activities or missional statements.
Should we keep that to more part of our strategy?
No, well, for now, those are great practical pictures of the things that you're doing as a church. So it fits here really well.
Some of the women work on the blanket making movie.
Okay, more service.
And in January, we opened up this space to 2 other churches who joined us in presenting the Alpha program.
Okay. I think that's a great container, or not a great container. I think that's great contents for the container. A group later will want to take that stuff, whether it's a couple of members of the leadership team or the board or some others, that what we recommend is that 3 or 4 people from this group get together and try to wordsmith some proposed statements that can come back to the whole in some sort of decision-making fashion. And again, for a church, the decision is typically around, do we come up with a new creative way of saying the Great Commission, or do we just make the Great Commission our mission statement? That's something that you can work on later.
Yeah, your transitional team, which we're putting together after this meeting, will be taking care of those things and putting it back to the congregation for their input, that the statements can be affirmed at a later time.
That's great.
Anywhere in this process, are we going to look at the statements we already have in place?
Yes, right now.
That's such a good segue.
Review the current guiding statements for the organization. So this is your current mission statement. To be a center of worship, fellowship, evangelism, and teaching, and to develop disciples who will touch the world with the gospel and the practical hand of friendship. How does that sit with you after you just described some concepts related to your mission statement? How do you like your current mission statement compared to what you described?
I like it.
Seems to be a good fit. Somebody else?
Aspiration, I think it fulfills all the things we've spoken about. It's a little bit wordy for me.
Okay.
But other than that, it's
Yep. The opposite of an aspirational mission statement would be sort of the concept of a shadow mission, which is, but what are we really doing? We've talked about that, so we're pretty much focused on aspirational right now, so that's okay.
The word touch to me feels a little, it makes it just too easy to make it very superficial.
Okay. Little, yeah, little too, yeah. Right. We're going to go touch that, and then our goal is to touch. Yeah, sounds kind of distancy, right?
I would remove the word and, just before the to develop.
Okay.
I think that's, it's sort of like a secondary thing. I think that just remove that and it's to be center and then to develop, that's all necessary.
That's interesting.
So I read that as a secondary thing, that and, yeah.
To be a center of worship, fellowship, evangelism, and teaching.
And then, yeah, no, I don't know, I
Does it contain the practical things that meeting people's practical needs is significantly? We're bordering on wordsmithing.
It seems really impersonal
Okay.
as a whole.
Yeah.
It sounds really like mechanical, and it sounds like it's talking about almost like a building opposed to the people in it.
Oh, the center. The building is the center of.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds funny.
Yeah.
Sounds very impersonal.
It's
Yeah,
it.
I kind of got that too, that there was a few like keywords they wanted to involve, and so then they're like checked off in the statement. But it doesn't have that like feeling of like I get who these people are and like what the person like the
Yeah.
it's not
How did it build in worship?
Yeah, like it's got no heart.
How does it, I think that's why you have the word touch center.
So yeah, if the word center is referring to like a physical place, then that's a great point.
to be people of worship, fellowship, evangelism, teaching. Something as simple as that makes it a little more personal. Where words, I don't know. We'll get to it. Dissecting.
It's interesting when I first read your website in preparation for today, I saw a lot of focus on your website regarding what God has done to bring about this physical center. Good or bad, but that's one of the pretty predominant pictures of your website. So the word center there, I think, has been historically referring to this place that God's given you, or that the church kind of rallied around, that built it. It was the place to belong sort of idea. Again, not wrong or right, just the impression that I got. But there are some aspects to this that do fit with what you described as some of your purposes and missions. So I think your smaller team could either affirm this all the way from just affirming this as it, or revising this to be more accurate to what you described. You got that, Rob? Let's talk about vision. Mental model of a desirable or idealistic future that doesn't currently exist, and that may never completely exist. So if you were, one of the ways that I think is helpful for me to imagine vision is if you were to close your eyes and you were to project a world 50 years from now that is changed because your church had an amazing 50-year run of phenomenal impact. Open your eyes in that environment. What does it look like? So if you were to imagine a perfect 50-year run, What's going on? What is the okay on fire for Christ? We'll hold on to that because we're going to need lots of statements like that. Another way to think about vision is if you took the problem that you identified at the beginning and fixed it, completely fixed it. What's that fix look like? Vision has to do with the particular direction of an organization and what it will take to implement its purpose. So if you did the things that were your mission activities, your purpose activities, and to what end are you doing those? So using the farming example, one particular farmer might have a vision to pass on to his children a farm twice the acreage that it currently has. Another may dream about opening up a canning operation, and a third may aim to be a pioneer in growing organic vegetables. So you could have this, the pretty typical mission of a farmer is to grow food so that it pays for the cost plus earns an acceptable living. That's a standard mission statement, but they could have different ends that it's doing those activities. Properties of a good vision. It's a mental model of a future, such that it deals with a world that only exists in the imagination, could even be described as fictitious, and cannot be observed or verified in advance of your articulation of it. And it may never become a reality before Christ comes back, but it's what you're going to be working towards. It offers a view of a better future for the organization. It is appropriate for the organization and the times that it's in, because what your church would have articulated as a vision 50 years ago is going to be different from the articulation of what it's going to look like 50 years from now. Clarifies purpose and sets direction. It gets everybody pulling in that same direction. Inspires enthusiasm and encourages commitment. It's inspirational. It's like, I want to be a part of making that happen with God's empowerment and his leading. It's well articulated, easy to understand. People can imagine what it is you're describing. It reflects the uniqueness of this organization specifically, its distinct competences, what it stands for, what it's able to achieve in your community, in the place and the times that you live. Ambitious, expanding the organization's horizons. So some corporate examples to take it out of the church world for a minute. These are some examples of vision statements. McDonald's is to be the best quick service restaurant. IKEA to create a better life for many people, to create a better everyday life for many people. I thought it was to frustrate us to build these things that it sells you. Nike, bringing inspiration to every athlete around the world. Pretty ambitious. The clothing company or the outdoor company, Patagonia, to build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm. Use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. Oxfam, a world without poverty. I love Oxfam's description of its vision. Just simply a world without poverty would be great. May never achieve it, but we're going to work towards that. So, what would it look like if Cedar Valley Church had a perfect 50-year run? You opened your eyes, you're in this community, and because you are wildly impactful with God's Spirit, describe what is around you at the time. This is often the hardest place to get input. So you already said, on fire? How would you describe that?
Well, yeah, sort of that statement, I jumped in way too fast as you've been
That's okay.
through all these other points. I'm rethinking how that would look like. It's just, well, now I'm thinking bigger, multitude of believers that are, whose foundation is firm and
Okay, great.
who does not waver in what they believe, but yeah, share with the person beside them.
Okay. It's great, Rob. Passionate. passionate people. What describe that passion? What's happening that's passionate? Or how do you know it's passionate?
That they can't contain it.
Okay.
Like that they know that what we have in Jesus is so good that they can't handle the fact that people don't know him.
Wow,
And
that's
that
so cool.
is just this massive ripple effect of people, yeah, just sort of like
Preach it.
fired up and super pumped and
Yep.
like knocking on neighbors' doors like, you gotta come here, you have to meet this Jesus guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, just people so like bubbling out with this like, yeah, faith and impacting people. And, yeah.
So much energy in what you're saying. That's pretty cool. Love it.
A community of healthy families.
A community of healthy families.
I think what Grant said, antagonistic towards the gospel, it's removing that
Hmm.
removing that conflict with your community.
Wow.
People understand that we don't have to be in conflict. We are people, and we're from a creator that here and desires the best for you as a creature.
So to encapsulate what I hear you saying, to envision a world where the world loves the church again, because the church loved the world again.
They're yes, loves the church, but in kind of more of a they're not afraid to come to our community events.
Awesome.
They're excited about the things that we believe in, even though they don't believe in them.
Yeah.
They're okay to send their kids here because they know that we love them because they're our neighbors.
Cool.
Got a statement that measures that exact thing. I always love hearing it when people say, "Oh, that's not what I expected
Okay.
from church or Christians."
That's great feedback.
Based on the last several months, I'm thinking 50 years from now, we should have a well-polished broadcast system.
Okay.
And taking an example from the restaurants, have door-to-door delivery. I'm very caring.
That's very cool. Really appropriate for your times.
Or I think like some along the lines of like a vibrant and spirit-filled community that
Thanks, Terry.
changes the neighborhoods around us.
Yeah, okay.
By the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
For some time now, I've noticed that we as a society expect our political leaders to have high moral standards.
Yeah.
But if a leader ever says he learned his standards at church, he gets shot down for it.
Yeah, sort of.
I'd love them to have the courage to say where they're at with moral standards.
Yeah, Jesus never called us to make the world more moral. Did he? Yeah. I think that because of the place of antagonism that we live in, we've got some church leaders that think our job is to try and make people just behave better. And that's often the focus of what we're teaching and preaching and saying to the world. And I think that misses the point of what Jesus came for. Yeah, yeah. So you're imagining a time that doesn't exist. Yeah. These are all great.
What comes along with that is being okay with persecution,
Mm-hmm.
because he says we will have
Yeah.
it, and it's part of the standing firm.
Yeah.
It's something to lead with, though, in terms of evangelism.
Yeah. Yeah. Get ready.
All of us,
I think Jesus kind of led with that a little bit. So did Paul. The world's going to hate you. Okay.
Hated me,
Yeah.
they'll hate you.
In 50 years, it would be amazing to see his building overflowing
Okay.
with people, not just Sunday mornings, but during the week, all that's offers, in an environment that uplifts and encourages and helps build those who are Christians and is incredibly welcoming to those, and it's not a scary environment for those who are not yet Christians. And also, it would be amazing for our church name to be really well known in mission.
Mm.
Everybody knows the name, and when they hear that name, they equate it with something positive that we've done in the community, some way that we've helped people or organizations, or
Very cool.
because there's a lot of people who've never heard of us,
Right.
and that's a little sad
Yeah.
that they don't even know who we are. You have to explain our name and where we are and how we feel, and just to be a bigger part of the community in a way that we're known for our good deeds.
That's inspirational. Anything else? What's going on 50 years from now because you've been wildly impactful? God's acknowledged in schools. Okay.
Having more people that we're supporting in the mission field,
Okay.
continuing sending out more and more people.
Awesome.
We used to have so many friends.
Yeah.
Even redefining what the mission field might be.
Okay.
It's not just Margaret and overseas. I mean, that's an incredible component of that. But seeing that mission field out and how can this group that gathers send people down the street in a sense. Also, just I think reimagining what the mission field is.
Okay. That's very cool.
Yeah, almost sending out missionaries daily. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
like you come here on Sunday and you kind of get excited, you get this excitement, and you go out. Yeah. Our missionaries, and you come back, and it's just this
Yeah.
ebb and flow of excitement. You want more people.
Isn't that cool? Sending missionaries daily.
And to add kind of to what Jen said too about our community knowing us and equating us with good things, but for them to also see that or understand that our motivation for doing those things is a byproduct of our love for Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. Knowing his love for Jesus. Yeah, hearing lots about passionate spirituality and those common denominators about passionate spirituality, changing the reputation of the church, Big C church.
I wonder what it will be like now with Dan gone. Obviously, Cedar Valley had, or perhaps still has, the reputation of non-Christians of coming here for funerals. I mean, obviously, they sought out Cedar Valley to have the service here, and Dan would always preach it straight,
Really?
and they still came.
Yeah.
Will that continue on? Will people, non-Christians, still come for that help in their time of need?
Lots there. What would be helpful for you right now, Rob? Would it be helpful to identify themes in that right now, or do you want to leave it there and identify themes with a smaller group? And while he's thinking and typing, you can see how the mission is probably going to be similar to other churches, but your vision can be quite different depending on how you corporately want to articulate the impact that you want to have. Just like the mission would be the same for a farmer, but the vision of different farms could be quite different. a church would have similar ways of describing its purpose, but different ways of describing to what end it's doing those activities. And yeah, just a sec. And it also helps you determine how, once you've articulated your vision or what you're moving towards, it helps you make decisions about where to spend money, the kind of staff you want to hire, the kind of programs that you want to run, the everything. This is what I said at the beginning, where this becomes the filter for decision making for you as a leadership team. What would be helpful in the information and the feedback, Rob, that you've got now, to identify themes now, or to have you do that and bring that back to the leadership team?
I think that would be better work for the transition team and demonstrate the time.
Okay, great.
What do you think?
I think so too. But I think that there's some great pictures and some common themes in what you just described that could become the components for a great vision statement. How do you feel when you hear those things as possibilities?
Let's read them out loud.
Yeah, great idea.
On fire for Jesus, multitude of believers, the foundation of faith is firm, passionate people, so passionate can't contain what we have in Jesus is so good that can't help but share it with others. Community of healthy families, removing the antagonism, easier for me to say, against the church, much broader point there than you expect. Polished online ministry, door to delivery, baby. Believers radically changing the community it's in, encouraged to say what needs to be said, removal of fear and stigma of being a Christian, being okay with persecution, build believers and welcome those who aren't yet believers, to be well known as a church and mission in a positive sense. God is acknowledged in our schools, more people going into global mission field, redefine the term missionary as a local reality as well, the ebb and flow from the church to be missional daily, and the love for Jesus creating the byproduct of easy conversation about who he is with those who don't know him yet. Unchurched people will come in times of need.
So how do you feel about when you hear those things?
Feel excited and hopeful.
Mm.
Like I still want to be working toward that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, maybe some of it's unattainable, so to speak, but like, why not give it a shot?
Yeah.
Towards it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's give it a go. Like even with the ending poverty, like living in a world without poverty, like maybe that's never gonna happen, but why not try?
Yeah.
Why not impact some people and change their
Yeah.
world?
Yeah. Yeah. Other emotions? What are you feeling? Yeah, excited, hopeful. Okay. Here's your current vision statement. You ready for the reveal? What do you see in your current vision statement that how does it compare with or line up against what you just described as vision?
I've always disliked the word interact.
Well, when you say it like that, right?
Touching and interacting.
Yeah, touching. Gotta keep that.
It doesn't make me feel as like inspired. I kind of read it and I'm like, oh, okay, like it's not a bad statement.
No.
And it's, I think in general, like, yeah, as we believe in Christ, like we should interact locally and globally. Like that's not untrue, but it's not as like exciting and like, oh my gosh, let's go do
Yeah, yeah, that's perceptive. Yeah,
And maybe if the second half was different, the first part would be more like, yeah, more inspiring.
But the second half is really important because it steers us away from being insular and inward looking.
it does. That's there to it. Yeah.
It's a good truth statement, but it's just not maybe it's not exciting. Interact, yeah, that's good.
You'll see in a second when we talk about values, but it's more of a value statement than a vision statement. It says some things that are important to you in terms of how you go about the behavior of creating a world that's like that.
I think even the word believe is kind of removes you a little bit. Like,
Okay.
I think a word like as we experience the light, or like something that's like we're not we don't just believe it. We actually are living it.
That concept, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So glad you're on the transitional team, big boy. Oh yeah.
Always looking at
One way to think about, you don't need to use this term in a vision statement, but it's helpful in forming the wordsmithing when you get to the wordsmithing stage is we envision or we see a world or we see a church that, words that actually refer to what you're looking at. You don't need to include those in your final, but in your crafting of it, like what do you see? We envision a world without poverty is sort of that. Oh, could we be bold enough to say that that's gonna be the case because God used us? Like, whoa, and that's okay. So as you get to the wordsmithing place, uh, as you're just trying on words or concepts that will encapsulate all that, stick that word at the beginning to try and at least get your wordsmithing going down that road.
What's yours for Hungry for Life?
We envision a world transformed by a global movement of compassion and justice, evidenced by the eradication of needless suffering. So Oxfam did a better job. We envision like a world without poverty is similar. Because we connect ours to the fact that the church is engaged in changing the world, whereas Oxfam isn't as much. But we envision a world transformed, evidenced by the eradication of needless suffering. So if we've been wildly successful as an organization, we've involved so many churches around the world that we've eradicated unnecessary needless suffering, is our vision.
Why is Oxfam's better?
You do?
Why is Oxfam's better?
Well, it's shorter.
Memorable?
Yeah, more memorable, shorter. It's an easy thing to create that image in people's minds. So I kind of like Oxfam's, but every organization's different, so you have to nuance it. But we put in front of ours the word envision because this is something we say we're seeing in our minds when we dream about amazing impact, and we're just going to work towards that. And so we've had people really criticize us, similar to Oxfam, to say, well, Jesus said the poor you will always have among you. Yeah, so you're going to discourage people because you're never going to get there. Well, I'm discouraged because we're never trying to achieve something fantastic. And if I look at Acts 2 and Acts 4, where it talks about the church that was wildly successful, it evidenced in no poverty among them. Nobody was poor among them. And that's where we get the ability, the braveness, the courage to say we see a world without needless suffering if the church was the church. And followers of Jesus acted like him, there wouldn't be poor people among us. So that's why we made that our vision statement. Following Christ, caring for people. And I would argue that's more of a mission statement than a vision statement, because you're following Christ and you're caring for people. Those are two words, activity words. That's more of a mission. A vision could be, I'm not saying this is it, but a vision would be something like, we want to have a church of 5,000 people in the city of Mission. Again, I would argue that's probably not the best articulation of a vision statement, but I wanted to make it stark from a mission statement. Putting numbers on a vision statement of a church could be problematic, depending on what you're programming and how you're doing that. But I just use that as a sample of separating vision from mission. Oxfam's mission, I think, is to provide clean water. That's Oxfam's mission. They run around the world providing clean water access points. That's what they do. That's their mission. Their vision is to see a world without poverty. So the reason what they're going about providing clean water towards the end of a world without poverty. So that's how you want to think about the difference between mission and vision. What are we doing? To what end are we doing it? So Rob gave you a bunch. I did copy what Rob gave me, but in your vision statement, in what you emailed me, you had a bunch of these words. Yeah.
Maybe I had an older vision statement?
Or no, I think it was your mission. I think in your mission statement, you might have had a bunch of these words defined. I can't really remember. But these are just what you gave me.
Yeah. Maybe it was changed. Well, maybe. Yeah, okay.
Oh, as believers in the life. Okay. So I think as a wordsmithing team, you got some work to do, but good foundation. These things typically evolve. I think when you really feel good about it, you'll enshrine it, and it probably won't change for a very long time. So your vision statement should rarely ever change. 50 years from now, it can change, especially if you've been wildly successful. Mission can change a little more often because the activities that you're doing might change depending on what's going on in the world. And your values might change a little more often than that because, again, strategies are often different. What you value in the process might be different. But vision is one of those things that you want it to be so ambitious that that it just keeps you all pulling in that same direction for a long period of time. If a church changes its vision every time it hires a new pastor, we want a church of 5,000 people. We want a church with a soup kitchen. We want a church that sends 100 missionaries a year around the world. The church just goes that direction, that direction, that direction. And there are some churches in a transitionary period that say, no, we're going to wait for a pastor before we have a vision statement, so that we've got someone that's where he or she wants us to go. And some churches take the perspective of we want to, as a congregation, decide where we're headed and then hire a pastor to help us to get there. That's not for today and beyond the scope of today.
But it's what you decided.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. The second?
Yep.
Okay. There you go. Values. Principles or standards that help people decide what's worthwhile or desirable. So it's more, I think, more helpful to say, what are the non-negotiables that make Cedar Valley Church? Abstract ideas that embody the notions of what truly matters or should matter in the performance of an organization, ways the organization satisfies its responsibility to its constituents. What's important for you in going about your mission? Properties of vision, value statements, non-negotiables, the way you go about achieving your vision. They guide the articulation of a vision, influencing questions about possible directions. Values guide the choice of information used to evaluate the direction. Ways that can be measured to see if you really value what you value. This is where you get into are these your actual values or just your aspirational values? So, before we bring up your values, try and discard them from your mind for a second. What are values to your church that make you unique, that are non-negotiable? Don't touch that because that's sacred here in a good way. For example, in our organization, we have a core value that 100% of the money that people give to projects will go to projects. And we enshrine that from day one. And I've had some staff over the years and board members that say, we got to change that because it makes it difficult to raise money for our overhead. And I said, you'll need to pry that out of my dead cold fingers. As long as I'm here, that's a non-negotiable and what makes us us. And we've got about 7 or 8 that are like that. And there are lots of things that are important to Hungry for Life and how we go about our work, but these are just the few that you don't touch because they make us us. Distinctive, the non-negotiables that guide our behavior. So off the top of your mind, what are some things that just are so non-negotiable and unique in a proud way for your church in terms of how you go about what you go about? Okay, biblically based. Let me push a little bit there. What part of the Bible, like what are some of the biblical bases, or because there's lots of stuff in Scripture. So what biblical concepts would inform your that input? Okay. So the Bible as your basis, the Bible as your foundation, sort of. Okay. Okay.
CVC's always been service/practical in nature.
I think that's super accurate to what we've talked about earlier. So meeting people's practical needs is a core value for you. What else is important that makes your church your church?
I'm just thinking about what was said about the Bible-based, and it's difficult because what I believe is not necessarily what every person in this congregation believes.
Okay.
And not to get hung up on that, but I think it's important that I understand the heart behind what you guys are saying, but the practicality of that is there's different theologies within our own congregation. And so I think if we're going to include that, we need to really nail down what we mean by that.
That's helpful. That's kind of why I was pushing a little bit to say, what do you mean by biblically based? Because you could have people, I think literal interpretation of Scripture was helpful in articulating what's non-negotiable about the way you see Scripture or how you interpret it. But yeah, you might want to flesh that out a little bit to see what do you mean by biblically based.
For example, I don't follow the food rules that are set out in the New Testament,
Yeah,
I don't follow head covering.
but it's in the Bible.
we haven't stoned our children for disobedience recently. Yeah.
Well, isn't the confessional of faith pretty helpful there? This church belongs to a denomination and a community of churches, and it's defined around a specific Anabaptist confession of faith. You might not know it, but it is true.
Is that
You might not even agree with it, but it's what formed this community.
so? Would an Anabaptist confession of faith be a core value for your church? Non-negotiable. But okay.
I think at the base or what we're built off of, it probably should be. Whether every single member agrees with every single statement I think that's a different question.
It is a different question because that's about.
Saying this is non-negotiable, it should be digestible by
Right.
If it's not, then
I think
no,
if it's defined like that though, like
Mhm.
if our confession of faith is for our leadership team and pastors, that they are operating off of that, that's one thing. But then if you make your core value also that every single member has to agree solely with that, I think those are two different things. Because I think a new Christian coming in, brand new, wouldn't have any idea of what the confession of faith is nor what it means. But if our leadership team is working towards that and like kind of as an educational purpose, then that there can be sort of two different
yeah, so then
aspects
we
of
just
it.
need to make sure that our leadership team agrees with the
Totally.
confession.
Yeah.
And this is where it's helpful, because if you just said today, yeah, it's a bleed and die for issue that we have an Anabaptist confession of faith and we want to enshrine that in stated core values, then they become, again, decision-making filters for how you include people here, whether you teach it, how it becomes a real core value and not just aspirational. So it is different from stating it than it is living it out, but you first of all got to decide what you want to state and then decide how you're going to live it out. So is it? Anabaptist.
Church to be Anabaptist? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Is an Anabaptist confession of faith a core value your church wants to commit to?
Well, it's at the front end of our Constitution, so I guess we better
Okay.
better kind of think that along those lines. That was originally what the whole idea behind some teaching before baptism and church membership was all about.
Okay. Again, not needing to decide it here, just needing to put stuff in the container of values.
Confession of faith? How many pages are you got? Like it's about 10 pages.
Summary's got 20 articles.
Okay, it's about 3 pages the actual confession, but then there's
Oh, it's good.
It's good. It provides like general statements around specific things. Like
Yeah.
baptism, we believe this. Wow, I can't think of any other ones. Yeah, like there's different subcategories and then like a good kind of one or two sentence statement regarding that. Gives us a little bit of framework.
And I think what I was referring to is that for the last, probably 60 years at least, probably more, is that the preaching and teaching has been consistent with that confession.
It has been or should be? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So depending on the different, kind of interpretations or views in the congregation, which as every congregation, there's going to be some diversity. But I think what the church has heard officially has been consistent amongst its pastors over the years.
Okay.
With that statement.
Okay.
So I think before anything that we need to decide if that is
Yep.
where we're going.
Right, that would be the decision.
Just because it's been our past, maybe our future looks different than that. Maybe it doesn't.
Yep.
But maybe it does.
And our confession of faith doesn't necessarily it restricts us in some ways, but it doesn't restrain us from being all the things that our vision and our mission describe either. So I don't necessarily think that our confession of faith is restricting in any particular way as it stands. Just depends on how we execute what our strategy is around that.
So let's stick the Anabaptist confession of faith in the container of values for now. You're not deciding that they are, because you will do that later as a team. But for the sake of getting input and time, let's just stick it in there. What else is important? Practical needs. What are some of we said already?
Biblically based foundation for living, literal interpretation of scripture, service, meeting needs, and Baptist core value.
Okay. What else are just bleed and die for ways you go about doing church here? Another way to think of the question is if someone came and took X away, a whole lot of people would be mad. What's X? totally take that and put it into a core value, so let's just put it in the container. The work of the Holy Spirit.
I know for me, it would be a faith based on action, not just opinion and ideas.
Okay, faith based on action. That's a great abstract but very helpful non-negotiable.
I think if there's no opportunity for training for children, it would
Okay.
be difficult for Cedar Valley. There's a lot of volunteers, there's a lot of money that's put into throughout the year, and I think that would be a big thing for Cedar Valley. All of a sudden, there's nothing for children.
Great. Value for children.
When you said that this, another way to think of it is like if somebody came and took it away, people would be upset by it. I think on some instances our building is that.
Yeah.
If somebody came and said, we're buying the land and we're taking away your building, that would be a problem.
I would agree. For the little that I've known you, what you've said today, seen on your website, the center of the physical center is a core value for you as a church. Whether you want it to be, I think it is now. So let's put that in the container.
I think we also value the spin-off organizations.
Okay.
Seniors Housing Society. We support MEI in Camp Squia.
Okay. So you value, how would you describe that group of organizations? You value partnerships with other Christian organizations, parachurch ministries. It's great. These are great. What else do you value? What else is important to you?
Worship.
Great.
I think right now it looks primarily like musical worship. I think there's a lot of people that connect that way and like worship God that way. And same thing, if somebody came in and said you can't do that anymore, there'd be a lot of people that were upset about that.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
And along those lines, I don't know if this is the correct response. I think if we took away traditions, like
Okay.
some traditions that this church has been steeped in or was founded on, if some of those traditions were taken away, that some people would be upset.
Okay. Can you describe some of those traditions?
Well, like worship.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So tradition is a value to church.
So I say it based on observation.
That's okay. There's no wrong on here. It was just putting everything in a container that are important to you as leaders. That's great.
Yep, for instance, right now I'm a little anxious about what the church will be doing to celebrate Christmas.
Okay. Right.
We're not celebrating this year. It was a total pass-on.
Says a transitional pastor.
We're transitioning. That was sarcastic.
They're going to deliver the candle to your house, Glenn. You just have to turn it on.
Yeah.
I think reaching and impacting the community around us,
Uh-huh.
if that wasn't a core value, that would be a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, and another one I'm thinking that just kind of ties with that too is trying to word this in a not building-centric way, but room for community use, and whether that's building or even just our assets. Like if we were stubborn, say, for me, it'd be non-negotiable if people said, no, nobody can partner with us or use our stuff, or unless they're part of the church.
Right. Yeah. And that's another example of how it helps form decisions, because then if that's a core value that you've enshrined, then you're doing things like opening the building for funerals or telling truck drivers they can park in the parking lot when it's not being used, because that becomes how you're making a filter for how you're making decisions.
I think, yeah, it can be said in a negative way that our building is a core value, but if we leverage that in an
Yeah.
appropriate way, it can be an enormous
Totally.
blessing to our community. So it's just like you said, how we manipulate that and use it in our context.
That's a gift that God's given you, so how are you going to use it? Yeah.
I know our hospital auxiliary has really appreciated being able to use the building for
Great.
their meetings.
That's great. It's a good list. Okay, missionaries. So taking away missionaries, or what's the value? Supporting missionaries. Okay, supporting missionaries is the value. Yeah, I probably shouldn't take the missionaries away themselves. Yeah, yeah.
Just a question for clarity on this kind of area is because even here in a group of 20 people, there's such a range of diversity and what you can do well. Is it worth at any point prioritizing or even eliminating stuff to do a few values really well?
Yeah, that was you're intuitively going to my next slide exactly, which is if you had 20 core values, I'd challenge how core they were. So I've heard anywhere between 5 to 10 core values are a good number to say we could value these things over other really good things that are not as valuable. So yeah, great point. So when you get together to articulate them, I would encourage you to think 5 to 10 as helpful for you in decision making. Beyond that, and I think you're watering them down too much, and they're not helpful in decision making and filtering decisions.
And it's simpler to remember for the general public, like what are our values? If
Yep.
you've got 5,
Yep.
you can kind of list them off and you know. Whereas, yeah, if you have 24, anything can be a value.
Same principle in strategic planning. When you get to that place of saying, here's our ministry planning or strategic planning, if you've got 10 improvement issues that you want to address in a 3 to 5 year period, I'd be hard pressed to think you could actually, these 10 things are a priority. Well, are they really priorities, or are they just desires? Maybe 3 to 5 could be priorities in a 3 to 5 year period of time. So yeah, knowing what you're not going to do is sometimes more important than what you're going to do. Do you want to rattle those values off again, just to see if you've missed anything? If you're thinking Rob hasn't said this, and I think it's important, let's just grab it now. Not that you're not going to have time for input later, but
Biblically based foundation for living, literal interpretation of Scripture, meeting needs, Anabaptist core value, work of the Holy Spirit, faith-based in action, teaching of children, our building, value, partners, and ministries like Camp Street, MTC, worship, tradition, preaching, room for community use of the property, supporting missionaries.
anything burst out of your mind that wasn't said? Great. Nope. Partially because I just don't know you. So, yeah, we'll get to that. I just don't know what's important to the church. And so I think that in what Rob said, I've heard many of those things you describe in your stories of what makes you proud to be a part of this church, your founding stories, what's important to you, why you're here. I think there was lots of things there said just this morning that would indicate that you're pretty close with many of them. You probably wordsmith, there's maybe some overlap between some of them, like biblically based confession that you can combine into 5 or 10, but I think that sounds like what I've heard this morning. Sound like your DNA?
Where are these? Like, where do you make these public? Like they're in the backs of these chairs.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how we would live these values if they're not in front of us to remember them. And 5 to 10 sounds ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I think it is too, depending on the size of an organization, and I think 10's probably too much, but depending on the complexity of an organization and how diverse it is, you may need to have that many in order to keep everybody together. But I think these become, not these, what you just described become how you're going to measure success, how you're going to make decisions, what you're going to keep before the people. If these positioning statements aren't used to position the whole organization and to communicate around, then they're probably not very important. Lots of ways to do that, especially in a church where you're usually gathering every week. You've got tons of opportunities to live these out.
A number of organizations are feeling pressure now to be more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't included that as a core value for us.
Okay, let's put.
Should be or not, I don't know. It wasn't there.
Okay, you put it in the container for now. We don't have to decide that, but I'm glad you brought that up. If that's kind of coming bubbling to the surface that hasn't been said, that's a great place to put it. So here are your current core values. How do you feel about these in light of what you said?
Well, it's got an inclusive statement up there at the top.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting.
I think there's a good balance of them being detailed, but open to include some of like kind of some sub-points. Like I can kind of tell that they've been narrowed down,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still space for like our building can be stuck in one of those, you know, like it can, they can be expanded upon.
Do your current value statements help in filtering in decision-making processes? Like, are they measurable? Are they non-negotiables to you? Similar to the question, are they aspirational or actual?
They're not as specific as the examples that were given, so I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. In your opinion, are they too generic?
Let me turn the question. When they were decided on, were they decided on these are what we want to value, or was the process these are what we actually value?
These were created by Pastor Doug and myself, along with the leadership team, not as value statements, but they're actually more to just be a maybe interim like descriptor of just what our community is.
Okay.
Because at this point, kind of like maybe we observed here too, our mission and vision statements kind of unknown even 3 years ago when we started to come up with a way to describe how can we actually tell people what is their value in any sort of language. So I don't know if I'd even saw them as core value statements.
Yeah, it was more of a sense of a filter which we want to be, and if we want to do something, would it kind of line up with belonging, being
Hmm.
a church that invites? Are we active in what we do? So that's why those key words were chosen, but we left it open. So yeah,
And interim.
yes,
Interim,
and
not an
it
empty
was
word.
really an intern because we felt we really didn't have anything. We wanted something to help us
Oh.
first to get us to where we wanted to
So
go.
that's helpful. These were more used for what you wanted to be, not necessarily what you were.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Your value statements are ways of describing your corporate culture. Because values determine culture, and if you're a community, your shared values determine your shared culture. So these were more saying, these were maybe a bit more helpful for ministry planning at the time. This is what we want to be rather than who we are. Okay. So not so much core values of what do we value, but things that we want to plan around.
Or have characterized us.
Yeah, in the future.
Well, I do see our church living this out.
You do see them?
I do see it.
It's great.
I think maybe some of the, if there's conflict,
the more measurable, the more the more it affirms that they're actual values and not just aspirational.
So in crafting or recrafting the heart of these things, if they are interim, do we want to have measurables with action verbs in here that are kind of more specific
To the way that you are.
to the way we want to be?
My fear is that if we place our, or if we articulate our current values, it restricts us from being aspirational in some way. So if, like, we're not goal setting even within creating our value systems or identifying our value systems, I think we missed the mark on achieving some of our, or like working towards our vision statement.
Okay, that's helpful for me for your sake, because core values should be actual, not just aspirational. Your vision should be more aspirational in nature, that we can measure moving towards that future state.
So what if your core values don't necessarily align with your vision?
If they don't help you to get towards your vision, that's a big problem.
Values
Yeah,
don't actually, if they don't specifically help you on a path towards your vision.
that's a problem.
Yeah, so in that way, like, can't values be in some way aspirational then?
If you're wanting to change the culture, they can be. So if your culture is this, and we don't like some of those values, let's say you have a current core value for the building here, and that's going to get in the way of you achieving your vision. I'm not saying it is, I'm just hypothetically.
It's actually a good example because I think
Okay.
our value around our facility maybe just needs to be manipulated in a way. It is a core value, but we need to manipulate in the way we use our facility in order to achieve or move towards our vision.
Yeah, and super helpful for the discussion for your planning in the future. That's around strategic planning. This is where we're kind of crossing over into strategic planning. But if you're wanting to change the culture from what you described earlier, when I said what are your non-negotiables that are real and actual, if you're wanting to change those from something to something else, then you would adopt core values that would be aspirational in nature, that you actually now have to work towards making real. So core values should be real unless you're wanting to change them. Then they become aspirational, so that when your church reads these, they would say, "Ooh, that's not really us." And then you say, "Yeah, you're right, it's not, but we're wanting to be that." Does that help?
Yeah, I think as a congregation we could definitely identify like some common values, even if we're not necessarily achieving or like living out those values currently, but we all believe in the same set of values. We could find those values and having or just needing to work towards them.
That are real, or that
That are real.
that aren't real that you want to be real?
I think that are real, but we are not executing them well.
Okay. Then there's some measurement that could go along that. But using the building as an example, if you said, you know what, our core value has been the building and the facility that we've got, and that's getting in the way of us achieving our vision, we've got to have less of a value on the building and make that a core value instead. Then you're talking about changing culture of a church, changing an organizational culture, which you may or may not want to do based on your vision. Off the top of my head, I don't remember hearing any of your current core values that would be inconsistent with what your vision might end up being.
Sometimes I just have a hard time differentiating between values, mission,
Yep.
vision. It's just a challenging thing to
It is.
make clear
It is.
all the time.
So it's up to you as to whether or not you want to enshrine what are your actual values, or whether you want to have values that are different from your current values. That's kind of a follow-up conversation for your team.
It is noon.
Yep.
What do you think, Dave?
No, this is the final slide here, which is just based on what you just said. After a really conceptual conversation, just want to bring you back to how you are defining these. What we do, to what end are we doing it, non-negotiables that define how we're going to go about it, that are real or that you want to become real, and strategy, which would be a next step. What are we going to do next to move towards our vision? What are the 3 to 5 things that are really important for you as a church to take a next step from where you are to the achievement of your vision? That would be, I think, the third rung on the building blocks of an organization, which is beyond the scope of what we're doing today or in January, but that's pointing in the direction of what would be a helpful next conversation from vision, mission, values after board governance. That's all I have.
Do you guys have any questions to end, or comments, or encouragements?
I just think we have a long ways to go even in the things that are listed under the values, that we don't necessarily welcome everybody into the building with equal, like, we have work to do.
And that's okay, because every organization does.
Yeah.
Every organization does. That's totally okay. Don't